got two of your fellow Aussies here, and it looks like recording just started without me there we go, because Danny did it. Excellent. Hey, well, welcome to another Colin Crandall MMA interview. You guys know me from MMA Power Hour, MMA from London to LA, and now Fight Professor. I am so glad to have this amazing guest on our show, along with our team, of course, the awesome Danny and the amazing Aussie Fight fan Jason. But we have the man of the hour, is one of the greatest commentators in the history and greatest announcers, the greatest minds in the sport of MMA and kickboxing, the amazing Aussie, Mr. Michael Schiavello. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Colin, it's always great to be with you. Thank you very much, Danny. Great to see you. And my other Aussie Fight fan, we share the same barber. Great to see you, brother.
You too, mate.
That's it. That recognizable haircut. Well, so much to talk to you about. We won't keep you but maybe 25 minutes or so, Michael. I know you got a busy schedule. And so I guess what I will do, what am I going to do? I think I know we want to talk about a bunch of good stuff. There's so much great K1 stuff to talk about. And I know my teammates here on the panel want to talk to you about stuff pertaining to Australia and your background and everything like that. So you know what? Why don't we start in order, showing class and being traditional, the either older millennials or Generation X, with me being the Xer and you guys being the millennials. Well, let's do it the traditional way and go ladies first. And let's start out with the amazing Danny.
Awesome. Thank you, Colin. Michael, it is absolute delight to have you here today. So thank you. I guess my first question is, MMA has become very, very mainstream in Australia over the last couple of years, and you've been absolutely central in terms of when it's exploded. What point in your career did you realize this was going to gain so much traction and I guess get to the level it's at today?
I guess in Australia, the first time we really look, I commentated the first ever mixed martial arts show in Australia on Aussie soil back in, I think it was 1996 or 97. It was something called Cage Combat out of Sydney, and it was billed as UFC comes to Australia, and it wasn't UFC, but for all intents and purposes it looked like UFC. It was an 8-man tournament. Mario Sperry won it. It was at the Sydney Convention Centre, I think, at the time. Mario Sperry won it. There were some great fighters in there. It was a sold-out event. There were like 5,000 people. It was crazy. And if you go on YouTube, you can actually find the Cage Combat event. And it was a wonderful tournament. Still very raw, not a lot of the great technique we see these days, obviously, because it was still in the embryonic stage back then, of course. But I knew there and then, when 5,000 people packed out this event that was promoted by an American called Randy Babel at the time in Sydney, I knew there and then this sport is going to grow. It's going to be big. It took a little while to kick off in Australia. They never did any more Cage Combat events, unfortunately. And I guess it wasn't until UFC really started appearing on Australian shores in, 2010, I think it was, the first UFC show in Sydney. And again, I was there. I was covering it for HDNet at the time, the old Access TV, and it was sold out. It was wonderful. You look around and go, well, this is it. MMA has made it as a legit big sport in Australia. And now, as we know, Australia is one of the fastest selling venues. Every time UFC arrives here, the tickets are snapped up within a matter of hours. It becomes the choice ticket to get. The premium bill to have is to be able to say you went to see a live UFC. We've held the attendance record. I was there when Israel fought Rob Whittaker down here in Melbourne. They broke the all-time attendance record. It's wonderful to see. And now you've got promotions like Hex, who are leading this charge down under, who are doing these big shows with quality fighters, who are investing the money in good broadcasting setups as well. And it's paying off, because a show like Hex has sent so many fighters to the UFC. They're the ones that birthed Israel Adesanya, Josh Kulabau, just to name two. There's more that are going to go there from Hex. There are more recently that have been signed. We've got a show not this weekend, but next weekend in Auckland, New Zealand, as Hex heads overseas for the first time at the Trust Arena. They'll sell that out with another 5,000 people. They've got big Brando Pericic in the main event as well. He could be destined for the UFC if he wins the heavyweight title. And it's good to see so many promotions getting behind mixed martial arts and really embracing it here in Australia and doing it well. And no one does it better than Hex.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Well said. Excellent. And do you know, Michael, all three of you are in Melbourne. You're probably all within 1 hour drive of each
Oh,
other
we are.
at the
There you
moment.
go.
Yeah.
Well, we got an overcast, another rainy day upon us today. I dropped the kids off at school. It's a little chilly. I do like your picture of the Golden Gate Bridge in the background there, Colin. I have very
Thank
fond
you.
memories of heading over there to Sausalito many a time. I
Yes,
do love
beautiful
that
place.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
great seafood down there, my friend.
Without a doubt, some of the very best. Well, let's throw it to Aussie fight fan. My man Jason, go ahead with a question for Michael or thoughts.
Yeah, Michael, I'm a big fan, mate. Obviously, been hearing your voice for 20 plus years now. Fan of everything, all combat sports. Just wondering, what do you think? Like the K1 never really took off the way kind of UFC and everything did in America, but obviously had a lot of success overseas and in Asia. We've seen some of the greatest fighters come over to the UFC, guys like Mirko Cro Cop, Mark Hunt, some guys like that have actually come over him and just done absolute wonders in this sport. I remember when they went over to Pride even made some adjustments to the rules to kind of get those guys over and quickly pulled those special rules out because they were just murdering everybody. And then, of course, came over to the UFC and we've seen them in title fights and things like that. What do you kind of think if someone was to go back and start watching some of these legendary fights in K1? What do you think would be the best fighters to follow or maybe tournaments that's really going to get somebody's eye and think, yeah, I've got to go back and learn this history?
You know, we talk about this on the K1 Battlecast podcast. Quick shout out there, K1 Battlecast, the official podcast of K1, and we drop a new episode on all podcast platforms every Friday. So another one is dropping today. But you know, our very first episode, we interviewed the man himself, Kancho Ishii, Master Ishii, the man who invented K1 back in 1993. It was a big year for martial arts worldwide in 93 because on April 30, you had the launch of the first ever K1 World Grand Prix. 8 men entered, 1 survived to be crowned the pretty much the baddest man on the planet. Then in November that year, you had the launch of UFC. So both the two biggest combat organizations in history, both surprisingly launched in the very same year. But we spoke to Kancho Ishii in our first ever episode of K1 Battlecast, and we went back to that very first K1 Grand Prix in 93. And I think that is where you need to start. It was just such a sensational tournament. It was full of knockouts. Branko Sikatic won it. You know, Maurice Smith was in there. You mentioned a lot of guys also who came from K1 to UFC. And I know that a lot of newer fans will go, yeah, Mirko Cro Cop, they'll go Mark Hunt, they'll go Alistair Overeem. Hey, Maurice Smith, guys, was a UFC world champion. He was the only one out of all the K1 guys to win the UFC world title. A lot of people, because it was, you know, before the Zuffa days, before the Dana White days, tend to forget that Maurice Smith did it. He wasn't a K1 World Grand Prix champion. He'd fought a lot of K1, both in USA and in Japan, but he came over to UFC and he planted that flag for all strikers as being a K1 fighter who came to UFC and became the heavyweight champion. So I'd go right back to the start. Obviously, there were some wonderful individual fighters to watch over the years. Andy Hug, the late great Andy Hug. You can't go past Andy. You know, the amazing story about Andy Hug was he was a Kyokushin karate champion, of course. But he was told he was too short to be a kickboxer and that he couldn't box and he'd be thoroughly beaten. And at the start of his career, it wasn't the greatest start, but Andy had tremendous heart, as we Aussies would say, a heart as big as Farlap. You know, no one had heart the size of Andy Hug, and he pursued it, and he was persistent, and he increased his ability, and ended up becoming the K1 World Grand Prix champion, standing only 5'11" in 1996. And the way he won that tournament, again, go back and watch it, against Mike Bernardo in the final, was to knock out Bernardo with a turning back kick to the thigh. And I remember after Andy did that technique, every bloody kickboxer in the world was trying to knock opponents out with a turning back kick to the thigh. So he was one to watch. Then, of course, Mark Hunt, 2001, I still say one of the greatest Cinderella stories in sport, full stop. Not just combat sport, but sport, full stop. Mark was a huge underdog, an unknown, was there to make up the numbers, and he beats Jerome LeBanner in the quarterfinals with a 16-punch combination. Then he beats Stefan Lecco in the semis. He beats Francisco Filio in the final, and he becomes, the most highest paid kickboxer on the planet in history in one night. It's incredible. 4 times Ernesto Hoost won it. 4 times Semi Schultz won it. And then you've got K1 Max, of course, which was the middleweights that kicked off in 2002. And if you're talking pound for pound, the best kickboxers in history, you just watch all the K1 Maxes. You watch Buakaw, you watch Masato, you watch Kraus, you watch Sauer, Petrosian. The only 5 guys who ever won the K1 Max between 2002 and 2010, and every year it was special. But great question. And again, do go back and watch guys like Maurice Smith. Watch some of the old guys and see how they fared and how they did, and also those ones that did transition, as you said, to Pride. Branko Sikatic was there, of course. He was one of the early ones in Pride, and there were a lot of guys who crossed over back in the day.
Absolutely. So what I was wondering, we can't even talk here. What, how, what, where? It's one of those days. How do you feel that some of the legends in the generation after that would have fit in K1? Let's say someone like Rico Verhoeven or a Badr Hari.
It's a good question. Well, take Badr out, because Badr was part of K1. He was probably the biggest name in K1 from 2008 through to 2010. Never won the K1 Grand Prix. Should have won it in 2008 in particular. Let me touch on Badr Hari quickly. So Badr was the biggest name in kickboxing for maybe 2008, 2009, definitely, during his peak in K1. 2008, he raced towards the K1 final, knocking out Peter Ertz in the quarterfinals, knocking out Errol Zimmerman. There's one for everyone to watch. Errol Zimmerman versus Badr Hari, 2008 semifinals, one of the best fights you'll ever see. Amazing. Colin, I see you nodding your head. I know.
Yeah, we talked about that when he knocked him down and you down the big kabobas.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Everyone should watch it. Then Badr goes in the final against Remy Bonjaski, and Remy's one of those guys who's really frustrating to fight because he smothers you, he clinches with you, he's awkward, he's moving out of the way, he doesn't like to engage a lot, and it got inside Badr's head, and it triggered Badr, because Remy has always triggered Badr. They're just 2 complete opposites, polar opposites in personalities. And so, Badr manhandled him, threw him to the ground, stomped on his head. Can't do that under K1 rules, not mixed martial arts. And he was disqualified, the only man to ever be DQ'd in a K1 World Grand Prix final. So do check that out. It was one of my favorite Grand Prix of all time. But you ask about new generation guys, we'll say Rico Verhoeven is the obvious one against some of the old school K1 guys. And again, we've posed this question. Listeners have posed this question on the K1 Battlecast podcast. And I believe my answer was Rico wouldn't win any of those old tournaments. I think he'd fare okay. I think he'd be final 8 in the world at the end of the year. I don't see him winning any of them. I don't see him having beaten 93 Branko Sikatic. I don't see him having beaten 94, 95 Peter Ertz. I think Andy Hook would have beat him in 96. I think Hoost beats him in 97, 98. 98 was Ertz. Ertz 98 beats him, no doubt. 99, 2000, Hoost beats him. Mark Hunt beats him in 2001. I don't see Rico ever winning a K1 Grand Prix. You know what? The best chance Rico would have had, and I mean no disrespect to Rico. I like Rico as an individual. I think he's a sensational fighter. He's so dominant of this new generation. He's the man of the new generation. The best chance he would have had of winning K1 Grand Prix would have been in either 03 or 04 when Remy won it both those times. Traditionally, they're considered the 2 weakest K1 Grand Prix tournaments in history. They weren't weak, but compared to the other lineups outside of those, they were. I think those would have been Rico's best 2 chances to win. But as far as any of the other tournaments, I don't see Rico winning any of them.
I would agree. Very well said. Let's throw it back to Danny.
You've got such an incredible wealth of fight bank in your mind, Michael. Is there a specific moment or a fight that absolutely blew you away?
Oh, Danny, there are a lot of them. And man, I forget, because sometimes I'll see a fight and I just don't remember even commentating it. There's a fight that popped up on YouTube that someone put on Facebook last year of me commentating you Aussie guys, and being in Melbourne, you'll know the name Chris Christopoulides.
Yeah.
Man, Chris Christopoulos fought Maurice Smith in Melbourne. And I'm like, what? When did that happen? That's my voice commentating that on Fox Sports. I cannot even remember. And bloody hell, it's Maurice Smith, for God's sake, that I'm commentating. And I messaged Johnny Sheeder, Chris's trainer, and I said, Johnny, when the hell did I commentate this show for? I just cannot remember it, because I think I calculated I've done over 8,000 fights in my career.
Wow. Amazing.
So to stand out from that, Danny, it's got to be a pretty damn special fight. And there are a couple. Listen, the obvious one, and it also goes back to Aussie Fight Fans' question earlier, where saying millennials and you guys to watch a specific fight. I think you guys know what I'm going to say. Zambides versus Shahid. It is maybe the most watched kickboxing fight in history. If you add up all the YouTube videos, the views on it, it's, look at the comments. There's like 4,000 comments on YouTube. It's, man,
Wow.
this fighting career, I think it was 2010. It was, man, it was something else. It was 4 rounds. It's like you're watching a fight on fast forward. It was crazy. The commentary that night from myself, Mike Hogan, and Ray Sefo was, we were on another level. It was fun. It was over the top. It was nuts. You know, we were calling Mike Zambides nasty little Oompa Loompa and the mayor of Munchkin Town and all this. And, you know, Mike didn't get offended. He loved it. We interviewed Mike on the K1 Battlecast podcast a few episodes ago. And, you know, he thanked me for helping to make that fight so historic and enter it into the annals of fighting immortality. It was that damn good. So, Danny, I think that's the one that really stands out first and foremost. Any Badahari fight, because he's my favorite. And again, Bada versus Errol, I think, had it all from 2008. And if you go to 2007, Masato versus Buakaw at the Budokan was one of my favorite kickboxing fights, full stop, of all time. It was back and forth action between two guys who were K1 Max champions, and it was kickboxing K1 at its peak and its peak form. It's, you know, K1 Max in Excelsius. It was awesome. So great question. And I know there are so many I've missed out, and so many local shows as well, you know, from Evolution and Knees of Fury and Ultimate Promotions and all the great promotions I've commentated over the years, and in Australia, New Zealand, and all over the world. But you're asking what comes to mind, and the memory bank immediately goes to those handful.
Incredible. Thank you so much for that.
Excellent. Let's go to Aussie Fight Fan.
Yeah, mate, just kind of tagging on the back of what Danny was saying. Yeah, I bet your passport's taken some hits over the years. You probably go through a bunch of passports, but with all the fights you've seen, like you've said, over 8,000, like we're talking live front row fights. There's probably very few people that have seen as many combat sports fights as you live. When you're watching as a fan, is it different experience for you, or if you could pick
100%.
any fight to watch, would you prefer to be making the call or to be just watching as a fan?
100% different. It's very weird when I go to a fight. And listen, admittedly, I don't go to a lot of fights. And look, I'll admit, I don't watch a lot of fights unless I really want to. I'm not one of these guys who every week tunes into the UFC or PFL or whatever it may be. I'm just not. Doesn't mean I don't like fighting. I love it. I love it as a sport. I love to watch it. But it could be that old analogy of, you know, you work at McDonald's flipping the burgers. Are you ever going to buy McDonald's and eat it when you're not working there? You know, I've got other sports and other things I enjoy doing as well. So if I do get to a fight as a fan, I'm invited along sometimes. I've been invited to UFCs in the past. Alistair Overeem's invited me a couple of times to watch his fights when he was fighting. And, you know, I've gone with Joe Rogan a few times as well. And when I'm invited along, it's good to be there in the audience watching. I enjoy it, but I feel like I want to be there behind the microphone. You know, I really do. And I get there, I'm in the audience, and if I'm not working it, I feel something is missing in me, just because it's what I'm used to, you know, it's what I love, what I enjoy doing. So if I'm there watching it, I get very picky as well. Like, I can pick apart production things because I've been doing this for so long. Like, oh, geez, I would do that different. They're not doing this. They need to bring this in here. The music should come in here. The light should be in here. This fighter should have walked in by now. I get really picky, you know, and it distracts me from actually engrossing myself in the fight. That's a really good question. That's a question I haven't been asked before. So yeah, thanks for asking it. Yeah, it's a good question. Really good question.
Speaking of good questions, I hope I got a good one here. Do you remember the fights that caused you to coin the term Goodnight Irene and the Big Kibosh?
It was not a fight that caused me to term Goodnight Irene. So this is the story behind Goodnight Irene. The first ever commentary I ever did was in track and field as a 16-year-old. I wagged high school one afternoon when a mate said to me, hey, we can get a few hours off school to go to Olympic Park in Melbourne, the old Olympic Park, and commentate the APS, which is the high school athletics meet. I said, yeah, I'll wag school for it. Why not? Sounds like fun. And let me preface that by saying that I grew up a huge pro wrestling fan. And being a fan of the wrestlers, I was also a fan of the commentators, especially Gorilla Monsoon.
Yes.
And one wrestler I used to like watching was Adorable Adrian Adonis. Now, Adorable Adrian had a sleeper hold as his finish, and Gorilla Monsoon used to call the sleeper hold the Goodnight Irene. Now, Gorilla Monsoon never said Goodnight Irene as a finishing phrase. He only ever said it saying, oh, he'll say like, oh, and Adrian's looking to lock on Goodnight Irene on Rowdy Roddy Piper. Right. I remember that one, Adonis versus Piper. He'll go for the Goodnight Irene. So that was the name of Adrian's move. It somehow stuck in my subconscious. So when I started commentating track and field as a 16-year-old and someone crossed the finish line, I screamed out Goodnight Irene. It was just inside my head. Then when I started commentating soccer on radio as a 17-year-old, they scored a goal. I shouted Goodnight Irene. When I started commentating fight sports as a 20-year-old, I believe it was back in 94, a knockout happened. I screamed Goodnight Irene. And it just stuck. There was a big promoter here called Tarek Solak back in the day who got me to commentate his show at Melbourne's old Dallas Brooks Hall. It was on Fox Sports just when Fox Sports had started. And I remember it was myself and Stan the Man Longanides commentating. And I was screaming Goodnight Irene all night long. And Tarek comes up and he goes, buddy, who is this lady Irene you always talk about? There was no lady. Right? And the freaky thing is, guys, here's the kicker. They always say the universe brings you what you ask for. I've been screaming the name Irene for 20 years. I end up meeting and marrying a woman named Irene.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Of all the names,
That's
of all the
amazing.
names of all the women in the world, I end up marrying an Irene. It's
That's
crazy.
amazing. That is funny. That is unique. Now, the Big Kibosh, there must have been one fight where you coined that, I imagine.
My favorite word in the English language is onomatopoeia. Do you guys know what an onomatopoeia is?
No.
I've heard of it.
Onomatopoeia is a word that sounds like it looks or sounds like it sounds. So smack or bang or pow or boom, right? They're all onomatopoeias because you read them and you can hear the sound in your head. I think I termed the Big Kibosh as a way to describe Mark Hunt knocking the bejesus out of people. And I wanted it to be an onomatopoeia of sorts. Like you hear kibosh, you read K-A-B-O-S-H is how I spell it, and you can almost hear that kibosh, And I'm pretty sure when Mark knocked out Hiromi Amada in the K1 Oceania tournament that was in 2001 in Melbourne, the tournament that Ernesto Hoost won, he beat Mark in the final, was it? Was it Mark in the final or semi-finals? Either one. Mark knocked out Amada in the quarterfinals. I think that may have been the first time I used it. So, Big Kibosh was termed for Mark Hunt originally, and Goodnight Irene goes way back.
That's
very
crazy.
Cool.
That's crazy because I thought it was your wife as well, which is
a lot of people do. A lot of
that.
people, a lot of people do. Some people thought it was Hurricane Irene, but the weird story too here is that when I started dating my wife in 2009, we met at a club, and then I was going on the road for 2 weeks doing shows in Korea, Japan, in Nebraska of all places. So we became pen pals, chatting on Facebook. And as you do, she was looking me up. She goes, I just met this guy. He's a sports commentator. Let's see what he does. So she's Google searching me, YouTubing me, and she hears this guy she just met screaming Goodnight Irene on all these videos. She thought I was some sort of weird stalker. She thought, oh my God, this guy's some weirdo. He's uploaded all these videos screaming my name. And I had to go, whoa, no. Have a look at the date stamps on those videos. They go back to like 1994, me screaming Goodnight Irene. So I had to prove to her I wasn't some crazy stalker screaming
I love
her
that.
name.
Fantastic. Well, we'll go last quick round. We don't want to keep you much longer, but really quick, what did you think when there was going to be kind of an exhibition or at least some sort of a match with Bukal and Sanchai? It didn't happen, and their sizes are a bit different, but they're both legends of the game. Do you think that could have been an actual match? Would they have gone for it? Who do you think might have been the successful in that match, and who do you think might have overall been the better Muay Thai fighter?
Hold on, there was a match between Bukal and Sanchai last
Did
year
they?
in bare knuckle in Thailand.
Oh, wow. So it did happen. The last time I
It,
looked, because in the last year, my wife passed away of cancer. I don't know if I
you know
let you
what?
know that, but
Can you
since
guys
then,
just quickly Google that one? It did happen last year in Thailand. I'm pretty sure Bukal won it.
wow.
Because they were talking to me about commentating it. I think it was in Pattaya or was it in Bangkok? It did take place. It was a bare knuckle fight.
Wow. I
Um,
think I thought it had been canceled, but at one point it was, but then they must have
no,
rescheduled.
it went ahead. I remember watching it. I just can't remember the result off the top of my head because, like I said, there's so many fights I've seen. My head compartmentalizes, and if I'm not working it, I sort of just delete
Understood.
it. But
Understood.
I'm pretty sure it happened last year in Thailand. And I'm pretty sure Buakaw won it by decision. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember, they did go for it in parts of the fight and give it a really good crack. That said, though, getting back to your question, there have always been these rumors over the years to match Sanchai and Buakaw as arguably the two, biggest Muay Thai names of all time, especially in the modern era. You go back to Samat Payakaroon, of course. He was big back then, but of the more modern era, Buakaw and Sanchai, and man, that would have been awesome. Who would have won it between the two? Depending what rule set. If it was pure Muay Thai rules, I may be favouring Sanchai. If it's modified Thai rules, I would have been favouring Buakaw. It would have been one for the ages. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they did, if I remember, meet last year in bare knuckle.
Yeah, they did.
Excellent.
It was actually November last year. I just had a look. Buakaw defeated him
by decision, right, Danny?
Yep.
Yeah, by
excellent.
decision. So, yeah, do check it out.
So,
it was worth watching. I remember watching it. It was definitely worth watching. It was a shame there was no knockout, but there were parts of the fight where they genuinely went for it. And yeah, it was a BKFC fight.
Oh, it was fantastic because a friend of mine, Chris Lytle, does the color commentary for BKFC, and he does a great job at that. And I can't believe I missed that, but I did have a lot of stuff going on. Real quick, how often in all the fights that you've called have you seen a Sanchai kick, and were any of them most memorable?
So I've called Sanchai's fights. Outside of Sanchai's fights, I have seen people imitate Sanchai's kicks. Not often though. It's such a trademark, patented style that Sanchai uses with those rolling, almost cartwheel type, almost capoeira type kicks that he uses, where he plants the palm on the ground and he'll throw the kick over the top. It's very hard to do. I've seen a few people do it unsuccessfully. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do it successfully, and by successful I mean knocking someone out with it. That's a really good question. I don't believe I've ever seen someone use a Sanchai kick successfully in a fight that I've called and win a fight with it. It's so hard to do. It's like trying to do a Peter Graham Rolling Thunder. I've seen plenty of people attempt the Rolling Thunder, especially after Peter knocked out Badr Hari with it in 2006. Everyone tried to do it. And again, I'm going to throw another gratuitous podcast plug here for K1 Battlecast. We actually broke down that fight against Badr Hari and Peter Graham on an episode and spoke to Peter, and he walked us through the biomechanics and the intricacies of the Rolling Thunder and how he beat Badr Hari with the Rolling Thunder on that K1 Battlecast podcast. And when you listen to Peter describe the Rolling Thunder and the milliseconds and the millimeters involved and the biomechanics involved of landing something like that, especially with 13 seconds to go in a fight that you're losing, man, it's extraordinary. And I've never seen anyone pull off a Rolling Thunder as well. There are guys that have pulled off wonderful kicking knockouts. Again, for Aussie fight fans, Stanley Nandex, back in the 90s, early 2000s, the Papua New Guinean based out of Australia was knocking the stuffing out of people with crazy kicks. But, Sanchai
actually, Brian Ebersole with that cartwheel kick. Do you remember Brian Ebersole used to do that cartwheel kick? He did it a bunch of times in the UFC, but he actually connected it once, and regional show landed it, and they all thought the fight was fixed. But he actually threw it in all of his fights. Yeah, he was another
Wow.
crazy guy. Yeah, landed once out of probably 20 attempts.
You know,
Nice.
landing that for a knockout in mixed martial arts, I dare say it would be easier to land it. For the reason being that your opponent has absolutely no idea about kicking arsenal of any kind. At least in kickboxing, you're aware there is something like a Sanchai kick, right? But even in kickboxing, in Muay Thai, man, it's got to be like, what odds am I giving it? I'll say even more than 1 in 1,000 that someone lands it successfully in a high level fight. I'm not talking about a high level dude fighting some tomato can, right?
Right.
But in a high level fight, maybe 1 in 10,000 that you land a Sanchai kick, which shows you just when you see it from Sanchai and he lands it and he finishes a fight with it, just how high level that guy is.
Yeah. And so many people don't know it. I know when I'm watching the fights with some of my friends, and on the rare occasion I see that, and I yell that, especially when I'm watching with my MMA friends, I yell out, wow, Sanchai kick. And other of them are going like, you know, and I said, well,
Not,
yeah, look back and see it.
It's sad, isn't it, Colin, that there are so many new fight fans out there today who just don't know any people beyond the last 4. They don't know anyone before Conor McGregor, a lot of them.
Right,
They really
pretty
don't.
much.
It used to be no one knowing people beyond the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, you know, Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner, rest his soul.
Yes.
And now it's like people don't know anyone before Conor. And people talk, you know, you often see debates, who's the greatest of all time? And there's no mentions of Sakuraba, you know? They don't even know Sakuraba. The dude won a UFC title. You know, the dude beat, what was it, 4 of the Gracies in Pride. He was all conquering back in the day in a Pioneer. No one knows who he is these days.
Right.
You know, you don't hear them mention these guys. You don't hear any mention of Maurice Smith when it comes to greatest heavyweights of all time. You know, guys that were pioneering the sport like that. You just don't hear of any of these you know, Wanderlei Silva. Even you'll see Chuck Liddell going back. You don't hear mention. You know, even Matt Hughes.
Right.
I mean,
I was just going to say, no one talks about
where's
Hughes.
the mentions of Matt Hughes? These guys don't know who Matt Hughes is. That guy was so dominant in the day.
Yeah.
He was owning and schooling everybody.
Yeah.
But you know, the millennial fans, if you call them that, are like, Matt Hughes, who's he? If it's not Conor McGregor forward, they don't know.
They don't, right. And it's too bad because there's such a rich history in combat sports, and all of us know that you can't leave these legends out.
These guys were fighting so much more often, always against high caliber opponents. And people who quick these days go, Khabib's the greatest of all time. Hey, Khabib was a great fighter, man. He was awesome. Undefeated, laid waste to a lot of people, but seriously, look at his record. He didn't have that many fights in the UFC.
That's right.
Right? There weren't that many. So you fight a bunch of other guys throughout Europe, maybe just, you know, in Dagestan or Russia or wherever it was before you hit the UFC. There weren't that many. You can't qualify someone like that as the greatest of all time.
Probably
Meanwhile,
not,
though, you know, people will talk about boxing and say, well, Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time, because you're analyzing Ali's whole career, the effect that he had on the boxing world, the effect that he had on the sporting world, the effect that he had on human rights and the rest of it. Ali didn't have a great record either to finish up with. He got beaten a lot later on in his career. You know, you look at his record, if you take the name Muhammad Ali off and you show someone Muhammad Ali's record, they would say, yeah, that guy couldn't possibly be the greatest boxer of all time. He's showing me his record, right?
Right.
So you've also got to look at it that way. You can say Khabib is the greatest of all time because you look just at his record, but you've got to look at more than just someone's record, man. You've got to look at the quality of opponents and the time of when they're fighting and who's around that they actually fought. And there's just so many great fighters from the past that go under the radar because you know, these popcorn fans and these microwave fans and want everything done in 2 minutes and bundled up nicely for their Instagram posts just don't understand.
100%, very well stated, and that's something that's unfortunate. And hopefully, some of them will start trying to understand a little bit because there's a lot to know and a lot before Conor McGregor, despite the fact that he said, "I birthed this game," is he didn't birth this game for sure. So that is well stated and 100% on point. Well, let's wrap it up here, Danny. If you want, Danny, if you have a final last thought, maybe if it's a question, make it a short one. We don't want to keep Michael too much longer, and then we'll go to Aussie, and then I'll wrap it up from there and let you get back to your day.
Hold on.
Yes,
hold
yes.
on. You just said Aussie.
The
It's
Aussie, Aussie. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Aussie.
how are you not?
You
How
got
are you
it.
not correcting Colin?
I'm
week in, week
I'm
out?
ashamed of myself. I bow my head in embarrassment and shame.
Oh, that is funny.
Aussie will be there.
There you
Thank
go.
me. I
There you
appreciate
go.
that, Michael. Danny, then Aussie, and then I'll wrap it up. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I've just got a very, very quick question I'd like to finish with. Michael, you've got an incredibly diverse and illustrious career. Is there something you want to conquer or do different? Well, what's next for you? And how can we follow you and support you on that?
Yeah, thank you, Danny. I'm so privileged to have commentated so many great events from the Olympic Games, the Commonwealth Games, and done so much K1 and Dream and Dynamite and so many other Glory, a lot of other stuff. I'm back doing K1 now. K1's reborn worldwide, so do check out the K1 events. We broadcast the last K1 Max Final 16 on Triller. Back in March, so it's still there. Check it out if you didn't get the pay-per-view. There's plenty more K1 coming up this year. The K1 World Grand Prix is back. K1 Max is back. I'm very excited about that. Bucket list wise, you know what? Being a huge soccer fan and doing a lot of soccer commentary, I commentated on the FIFA Women's World Cup last year. I'd like to do a men's World Cup somewhere, FIFA World Cup somewhere in the future would be awesome. I know it's big bucket list. Also to do a WrestleMania, or that'd be bucket list one day. I'm absolutely thrilled that I've done so much over the years. But do follow on Instagram, Schiavello Voice, the same on Twitter or X, Schiavello Voice. And follow the new K1, man. It's awesome, and there's so many storylines unfolding and so many characters, and K1's still got the best production on the planet, so give it a follow. But thanks, Danny. Great question.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been amazing.
Thank you.
Aussie.
Yeah, so I was a massive fan back in the day of your Voice Versus show. And like most people my age, I kind of got into MMA before there was MMA. That was from watching Bloodsport 500 times as a kid. And obviously you had that famous interview with Frank Dukes. Just wondering, because you did look a little bit skeptical with some of his answers. I was wondering, did you believe some of the stuff he was saying, or do you think it's just really good storytelling?
The thing with the Voice Versus is I always did a lot of research. I always asked the questions that fans wanted to the answer to, but I never tried to pass any judgment on it. So with someone like a Frank Dukes or a Steven Seagal or whoever it may be, it's that old saying, give someone enough rope, So I would let Frank Dukes take all the rope that he needed. And then it's up to you, the viewer, to decide if he hangs himself or if it's legit. I believe the Bloodsport Kumite, sorry, let me rephrase that. I believe that Kumites took place. We're talking about the 1970s, when martial arts was raw. And it wasn't, and the 80s, of course, 70s and 80s. And it wasn't uncommon for gyms to visit other gyms and challenge each other there and then on concrete floors. You go to the Voice Versus Hoist Gracie, and Hoist talks about it. Gyms coming to the Gracie dojo and challenging the Gracies, and then filming it on home video camera from the 80s or early 90s, whatever it was. And they're arm barring people on concrete floors. The old dojo wars back in the day, where dojos would go to other dojos and fight each other. There were Kumite style events, but you get this Hollywood image of Kumite. You think that crazy platform and burning fires and a silk clothed referee, and you think Chong Li killing people and dust being thrown in eyes. No. Now I believe that the characters in Bloodsport's Kumite were based on real characters that Frank Dukes had met or had fought. Frank Dukes did fight in Kumite events. I believe that, but not like it's depicted in the film. It would have been raw. There would have been very limited rules. The fights would have been over pretty quickly, I dare say, as well. It would have been mostly just stand-up, because back then no one was grappling. No one even heard of grappling. Would have had two karate guys mostly, or kickboxing guys, just whacking each other with kicks and punches mostly. Do I believe the record? Do I believe that UFC was originally founded because of him and he was going to be the guy it was all based around? There's a lot I don't believe, and there's a lot I do believe, but also I believe it has been Hollywoodized, if that makes sense. I liked Frank. I liked his storytelling ability. I think some of them were a little far-fetched, and I think some of them were legit. But there's a lot of people I talk to in any celebrity interview you do that there's always people that are selling things for a little bit more than they are to add drama, to increase drama to them. Same with pro wrestlers. You know, a lot of pro wrestlers out there will exaggerate the truth quite a bit. It adds to the drama. But again, it's all part of the beauty of it. When you sit down, you watch the Frank Dukes interview, you watch Seagal's interview, you're like, is that real or is he talking crap? Did Steven Seagal really know Bruce Lee? You know, you add up the timeline of it, the chronology of it. It seems weird that he would have known Bruce Lee. It seems weird that Bruce Lee would have introduced, as he says in the interview, Seagal says, Bruce introduced me to Brandon and said, oh, this is my little Caucasian boy. And like, how do the timelines add up there? How is Seagal at that stage in Bruce Lee's life someone that Bruce Lee would have even spoken to? I mean, Seagal would have had to be pretty young. Like a
teenager or something. Or
it doesn't add up. So, you know, some of the stuff Frank says, this is a great question. Some of the stuff Frank says doesn't add up, and some of it does add up. You've just got to know, again, how things worked back then. You ask Michael Jai White, did this shit happen back in the 80s, where their dojo wars, where there kumites on like concrete floors, where there these underground sort of fights taking place? Hell yes, there were. But were there people dipping their knuckles in resin glass, you know? No, that wasn't happening. You know, is there a guy like Chong Li holding a guy by the throat and then delivering a death blow to him, or doing a dim mark? No, there wasn't. So, you know, you've got to take it with a grain of salt, but there was some validity to a lot of the things that Frank did say.
He did manage to get that coin twice, though, didn't he?
You know what? It took a few goes to do that.
Oh, really? Bit of editing in that one.
No, it wasn't editing. You know, it wasn't editing. It's just that Frank said my hands were slippery holding the penny, and he said his hands were slippery. It might have been because it was shot in Vegas. We're in a penthouse suite in the Oriental Mandarin Hotel on the Strip. He did it. I mean, he did the coin pick. That was legit. There was no slowing down. There was no editing when he actually did it, but it did take a few goes to get it.
Okay.
Excellent. Michael, I'm going to leave you with a quick funny story, and then thank you so much for your time. Flashback to the early mid-90s. Van Damme was really in his peak. I was a little bit younger than Van Damme, and talking to a buddy of mine who got a job as a background player or an extra in one of his films. And he said, I'm gonna get my big break on the Van Damme set. And I said, how are you gonna do that? You're an extra. And he said, well, show me some of this karate you learned. And I had taken a little bit of Kempo and Hapkido at that point, then later on focusing mostly on Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But at that point, pretty much striking. So he said, show me a couple techniques. And I showed him to him, and I said, so what now? And he said, I'm gonna flag down Van Damme on the set and tell him what a big fan I am. And then I'm going to tell him I'm trying to do one of his techniques, but I'm not sure of my feet position. And he said, then when he looks down at my feet, I'm going to hit him with the chops and chop the crap out of him and then kick him in the ribs and knock him backwards. And he said, then I'm going to be famous for beating the crap out of Van Damme on his movie set. And I said, A, if you can execute that like that, that's great. But B, if you do, and he doesn't get away and beat the crap out of you, the bodyguards are going to come over there and annihilate you. So it's either Van Damme or the bodyguards. They're going to probably beat you into the dust on the ground. There was not as much restriction on what people could do to people in the 90s. And I said, so you're taking a big risk if it works. And then even if it works, who knows if they're going to publicize that. So I said, I really wouldn't recommend it. And he said, well, I'm going to think about it because I want to get to be famous. And I said, probably the wrong way to go about it. And fortunately, he didn't do that because that probably would have been an ugly situation, I would imagine.
It's a good story. And I've heard similar stories, and I've seen similar things to this because I met Jean-Claude several times. I hosted his Australian speaking tour a couple of years ago. Great guy, by the way. Jean-Claude's awesome, man.
Seems like it.
But I remember first time meeting him back in, like, was it 98? I still got the pass here for it. Invited to his birthday. They had it at the old Planet Hollywood at Crown Casino in Melbourne. And I remember people that night saying, oh, you know what? I'm going to throw a kick at Van Damme's face and he'll recognize me and I'll become – this was the days before Instagram, right? So that's what you tried to do back then to become famous. You had to get get recognized. And people say, I'm going to do the full splits in front of Van Damme, and he'll say, I'm legit, and blah, 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 blah. So it's a funny story, but Van Damme is a legit martial artist, was a legit kickboxer, did fight on the Dominic Bella undercard, tore a guy's nose with a spinning back kick back in the day. This is going way, way, way back as well. Trained with some very good people over the years. And when I was hosting his Australian speaking tour back in just before COVID hit, so back in March 2020, we were on stage and everyone wants to see if Jean-Claude can still kick. So he got me to be his test dummy, and I stood there, guard up, and he said, you know, whatever you do, don't move, just stay still. And I'm shitting myself because I'm like in front of a big audience here, and if he misses and he clocks me, I'm going down. He throws this spinning hook kick, Colin, that literally a millimeter from the tip of my nose, I feel the wind of his shoe go past me, and he's still got it, man. I'm like, bravo.
Nice.
Yeah, the dude's in his 60s now, and he's still got it, and he's still lean, he's still mean. I love Jean-Claude, really good guy.
Absolutely. Probably trying to punk him in his prime in his early 30s would have been probably as the British would say, a bloody disaster, I would think, right?
Dude, he would have wrecked people. He trained with Dieter Diafat back in the 90s when he was training for what movie was it? That one with Roger Moore, The Quest. You know?
Oh yes, think so. Yeah.
Dieter Diafat was a great French Muay Thai world champion, and I remember interviewing Jean-Claude back for the old Blitz magazine back then. And, you know, him telling me he's been training out of Thailand with Dieter, and he's been training his leg kicks. And so, you know, yeah, Jean-Claude is legit. And you got to watch those guys. And a big shout out to the most legit guy in Hollywood, Michael Jai White, as well. I love that dude.
Absolutely tremendous guy. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for jumping on. It means a lot to me. I hope we did somewhat of what you did on The Voice here with you, and gave people a chance to see inside the great personality and heart of Michael Schiavello. And it means a lot to me. I know you're not going out and doing everyone's show, and so it means even that much more to me. And so I want to thank you so much for Danny and Aussie. We really, really appreciated having you here on our show and chatting with us.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Aussie. Really appreciate it, guys. And love to come back on in the future. Have a great day, everyone. Good evening to you, Colin. And we'll chat again soon. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. Take care, Michael. See ya. Bye-bye.